Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this next in a series of webinars from Benefex. Today we're going to be talking about reward and racial diversity and why it's HR's time to act. There's obviously a lot of information out there at the moment. Lots of people are talking about kind of race and the impact it has on work and society, and why we should be talking about this issue more and more, and changing systemic racism and improving the lives of Black people in all areas of societies following largely the death of, or the murder of George Floyd about a month or so ago. I'm delighted today to be joined by Andrea Pattico. Myself and Andrea have known each other for quite a long time now. So I remember pitching to you when you were at ASOS, and it was myself and our CEO who were going to come along to pitch to you, and he couldn't make it, I think, at last minute. And so it was me being pitched against about 13 or 14 people at ASOS. And I remember you all asked about 3 questions each. I remember it felt like a really difficult pitch, but then we won your business.
You won the pitch.
And I also remember about our 3rd meeting with you, I went to say goodbye to you, and I think you said, "Gethin, we can hug and kiss now." And you gave me a big hug. And I remember that making my day. So yeah, I think it's really serendipitous, and I'm really glad that we're kind of back to this point now, probably 8 years later or something like that, to have this important talk, which I know we're both passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so happy to be having a chat with you, because I adore you. So I'm very happy to be on the call.
Thank you very much. So just before we get started, for those who don't know you, do you want to just give us a bit of a background on yourself and MVF? As we know, lots of MVF people will be listening. So
there are lots of MVF people listening. They're all making me very nervous. So yeah, hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrea Pattico, as Gethin has said. Everyone calls me Ange. So if you call me Andrea, I've done something wrong. So please don't do that when you're sending questions through. I am the Chief People Officer at an incredible business called MVF. Who are also the Sunday Times #1 best company to work for in the UK. Feel very proud of that. And I've been working with MVF for, it's actually coming up to 4 years now in September. It feels, it's gone so quickly. I work with an amazing team, some of whom, I think most of whom are on this call, and together we're responsible for creating a great people experience and having a brilliant people strategy for globally for MVF. I am a coach, a qualified coach, an accredited one, and I'm just really passionate about helping people. And helping people to be better. I don't believe in the concept of best, because I think there's always more to attain to. So it's a little bit about me. And if you go to the next slide, then you guys can read all about MVF and what we do, rather than me going into it, because we've got a lot to talk about.
We have, and our CEO, Matt McEwall, is actually listening, so he says hello to you.
Hello,
and he reminded me the reason why he wasn't at the pitch with me when you were at ASOS was because his wife went into labour, which is a pretty good excuse for not turning up to something.
I think that's a very good excuse. I remember that.
Excellent. So I guess one of the first things I want to talk to you about, so this is probably a bit of a somber start, I guess, but you know, I completely appreciate this has been a really difficult time for Black people, even in this country. You know, this is not a US-centered problem. This is a problem right across the world. So I just kind of wanted to ask, kind of, how have you been? And, you know, as a Black woman in this country, how has it affected you over the last month or so?
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that you're asking me that question today and not probably even 3 weeks ago, because I probably would have been a blubbering mess, which wouldn't have helped at all on the webinar. But it's been a range of emotions for me over the last few weeks, I would say. I think even now I can feel every time I think about it. I had a couple of weeks where I would go to sleep and wake up with the George Floyd video on replay in my mind. But not just that video. It really started for me with Ahmaud Arbery, who was a young man who was out jogging, and he was murdered by a father and son, and the father was actually a retired law enforcement officer. So the images of those 2 individuals and what happened to them just kept replaying in my mind. And I think I moved from waves of sickness to anger to frustration to indignation, and then I went on this silly journey of trying to find balance. And And when you're feeling angry and you have a right to be angry about things, trying to find balance is probably not the best idea. So I tied myself in knots around that. I couldn't really say anything to anyone for about a week after George Floyd, and because I was just too angry. And I suppose it's been kind of like, I would describe them as building blocks, because I've been quite saddened by some of the, since that time, by some of the comments that I'm seeing on social media. There was even on LinkedIn, which I was saddened by but not surprised. And I remember seeing a post which was actually quite it was an innocent post, but it was the comments that happened underneath it that made me quite, I was taken aback by them, and that was hard. I think I've also felt that the silence from some people has been deafening, and the ignorance of some people. I think I talked about it just before we got on the call, but the fact that people are choosing to be ignorant, and I think that silence and also ignorance by choice means that you are complicit in this problem. So I've had so many thoughts going through my mind. Today, however, I feel quite hopeful, because I think I've reached a place where I personally know what my purpose is in all of this and how I can help. And part of that will be in the workplace, as well as stuff that I do outside of work as well. So yeah, hopeful is where I am now, because I've found my voice and I've got a pretty big mouth, so it's fine.
And I think it's really interesting. I think one of the reasons why I reached out to you about joining us on this webinar was you kind of hinted at it exactly there. So I'd seen the same. I'd seen lots of comments around, you know, Black Lives Matter stuff shouldn't be on LinkedIn. This is not a work issue. This is not Facebook, you know, the usual trope that comes out when somebody puts something on LinkedIn that they don't think should be there. And again, the same people that, you know, people who are kind of saying something like, you know, I don't care about race, but we shouldn't be talking about this. You know, I don't see color, all this kind of stuff that we know that sometimes that's driven by people who are well-meaning, but actually is completely going against the cause. And I guess we've seen this week, you know, people flying banners from, you know, paying for banners to be flown from planes saying all lives matter. And it's kind of like, we know all lives matter. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about here a pressing need for a group of people that actually their lives matter in a broad sense of the word at the moment over other ethnic minorities and other white people. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you as well, is because you are one of the few people I know who are chief people officers or HR directors who are Black. Unfortunately,
not many of us.
No, there's not. And I did think, I did wonder whether that was just me and my kind of my white bubble that I kind of live my life in, but actually I did look into it, and there's not very many at all. And the CIPD have written a few articles about actually the lack of colour when it comes to kind of HRDs in this country and chief people officers is actually quite alarming. So I thought that's what we could talk about. And I know at Benefits we've been talking a lot about diversity and race even before the murder of George Floyd. And so it seemed like a really good opportunity to say to people that actually this is a problem that exists within HR. There are lots of things that HR can do. And even down to those kind of reward, remuneration, benefits, there are things that employers can be really conscious of when it comes to including people. Because as you know, we are dealing with systemic racism. So we are dealing with the fact that for 400 years since the first Brits hit Jamestown in the US and enslaved the first people from the Caribbean, then, you know, for 400 years, Black people have been on the back foot. So we're trying to undo a hell of a lot of stuff that just completely has kind of filtered its way through almost every aspect of our lives. And so I don't know why there's so much surprise that the workplace is a place where people are feeling disadvantaged and seeing racism.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there are so many examples, and I think it's probably, I was thinking about this and I thought, Ange, do you give an example of where you've encountered racism in the workplace? And I think it probably is quite helpful if people hear. And when I was thinking about this last night, I thought, do you know what? The first time, I've been working since I was 14, and the first time that I encountered racism at work, that I can remember that is, was actually when and this was the biggest thing for me. It was the first time it was a big thing for me. It was when I was 19 years old, and been in London for about a year because I was at university. I worked my entire way through uni because I had to. And that's another thing about privilege. But when I was 19, I went for an interview at this well-known insurance company. I won't say their name, but I had an interview in the HR department for an HR administrator role. And I'd spoken with the hiring manager on the phone. My name was Andrea Lawrence back then. I wasn't married at 19. And the phone call went really, really well. So I was really looking forward to the interview. I turned up at the building. The hiring manager comes out to reception. There were two people sitting in reception, myself and another white lady. And the hiring manager walked over to the white lady, put her hand down and said, "Oh, hi, Andrea." The lady looked up at her and said, "Oh, no, that's not me." So I basically smiled and said, "Oh, hi, I'm Andrea." And the woman's response was not hello, wasn't "it's nice to meet you," it wasn't "how are you." She looked at me and her response was, "Oh, you don't look like you sound." And I think I was so shell-shocked. I was like, "Pardon?" Because I was like, did I hear that correctly? And she repeated herself. She had the audacity to repeat herself and told me that I didn't look like I sounded. So maybe I'm not like most people, but I picked up my bag. I told her that she wasn't the sort of person that I wanted to work for, and I left the building because there was no way that I would work for not just the individual, but an employer that allows that. And a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to my parents about their experiences. They came to the UK when they were in the 1960s. Dad was 18, so he came in 1961, and Mummy was 27. She came in 1969. And my mum worked for the post office, and there were customers who refused to be served by my mum. They would not get in her line. They would not look her in the face. They wouldn't talk to her, and they would literally leave the building if they were being told that my mum had to serve them. And my dad was a builder, because he came to the UK when he was so young. He basically got into the building trade, and the foreman, one of the foremans that he worked with quite early on, he decided that my dad, because of his colour, didn't really know how to count and wasn't intelligent enough to work out what he should be paid. And so he always used to try and shortchange my dad's wage, and would not pay my dad correctly for the hours that he worked. And if anyone knows my dad, they would know that he's a whiz with numbers. My dad is a maths genius, and so he knew exactly how much he was going to be paid. But it was just unfortunate that this foreman decided that because of the colour of his skin that he wasn't as intelligent. So, 1960s to 2020, systemic racism in the workplace is alive and well. It hasn't gone anywhere, but I think as a professional body, we have to be determined to do something about this, because we can't have another generation go through what some of the things that even I've experienced. And I'm 44 next month. We shouldn't be talking about this or even having this conversation still 400 years later.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think you think about the civil rights movement in the US, you think about the death of Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks being asked to move seats in 1955. This feels like stuff that's a long time ago. My dad was born in 1946. He's still alive now. It happened in his lifetime. This is recent history. This isn't ancient history. We're not talking about hundreds of years ago this stuff happened. And I think it's important for people to remember that, in that evolution of society, it's still in its infancy. This racism hasn't gone away because it happened 70 years ago. It's very much here. Before we kind of get into some of the points I want to discuss with you, if anyone has any questions or statements, I know people have been providing them anyway, please put those in the Q&A or the chat section. If you want to talk about what we're talking about and continue the conversation after this on Twitter or social media, you can use the hashtag BenefXLive, and you can also tweet myself, MBF, Andrea, and BenefX. But I wanted to give listeners some examples of kind of some of the research that's come out. This is all in the last week. So this has come out from CNN and The Independent. And so this kind of really, I think, gives us an illustration of what life is like for Black people in 2020 in the UK. So Black African households have around 1/10 of the wealth of white households. Black and ethnic minority workers are more likely to have lost their jobs than being furloughed during lockdown. So we already know coronavirus has affected disproportionately Black and ethnic minority people in this country. People are still trying to work out exactly why that is. But we can also see the fact that BAME workers are more likely to lose their job rather than being pulled on furlough. So in a list of employees, that is disproportionately affecting Black and ethnic minority employees, which is just incredibly shocking. And most Black Britons say that BAME people have less opportunities to succeed than professionally white people. And when asked if employers are doing too little to promote BAME employees, most Black people believe that they are doing too little. And a couple of points here as well from some of the research that I've been doing, which touched on some of the things that you said. If you have an African or Asian sounding surname, you need to send twice as many job applications to those with traditionally English names to get an interview. So my name's Gethin is Welsh. I once got asked at a job interview that I went to that they thought I was Indian. So somebody thought they got the Irish from India. But that kind of stuff, people making these sweeping assumptions just because of a name. We know that Black men are routinely perceived to lack the soft skills, things like likability and motivation, that managerial jobs require. So just because somebody's Black, most people perceive that Black men do not have soft skills like empathy, etc. Ethnic minority pensioners in this are around 25% worse off than white pensioners. And we'll talk about the ethnicity pay gap shortly. And the percentage difference in median hourly pay between people of white ethnicity and all those that belong to an ethnic minority is the largest in London at about 22%. So you're starting to see that actually, but no good reason at all, Black people are completely disadvantaged when it comes to the workplace. So this is stuff that deserves to be on LinkedIn. This is stuff that HR should be talking about.
Yeah.
And as I kind of mentioned before, Benefix will be writing quite a lot about diversity and well-being. And a recent report I read published by Time to Change describes the results of a mental health survey of ethnic minorities in England. And the report highlighted what they call dual discrimination. So that was discrimination in everyday life because of someone's mental health, but also racial discrimination faced by the majority of respondents, because 1 in 3 UK adults now experience racism at work, and a third of those employees who've been subjected to racism have said that they've taken a period of sick leave, and it's disproportionately affecting their mental health. And so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, the fact that mental health is such a big thing on the reward agenda and the HR agenda, and it's disproportionately affecting Black people in this country.
Yeah, that doesn't... It doesn't surprise me. I think the stat of 1 in 3, I always say that's actually those are the people who are actually telling us, and there will be plenty of people who aren't. So I actually believe that the stats are higher than that. And I was reading a report by BITC. They released a report on, I hate using the terminology BAME, but that's another conversation, BAME women and mental health. And in that report, it was they referred to some stats of 2014 where they talked about 29% of Black and Black British women who experienced a common mental disorder in the past week. So week on week, you would have 29% of Black British women having depression or anxiety. And when they dug a little bit deeper, 2019, they did a mental health at work report, and that cited that 25% of Black, Asian and ethnic group respondents who had mental health symptoms relating to work, they said that their ethnicity was a factor in those mental health symptoms, versus 1% of white people. It's shocking. But the thing that got to me, and I was on a call yesterday with Sandra Kerr from BITC, who leads the Race at Work agenda for BITC. They've got this report on Black women, or on BAME women, I should say. There are no stats about men. And that really, and I asked the question, are you planning on doing a report? And she said, we should, but men aren't talking. And that really stuck with me because Black men in particular are unlikely to speak up because there's a stigma culturally associated with Black men talking about mental health. So, and we know it's not great because I went away and I looked at the Nursing Times, who reported that out of every 100,000 Black people, 306 are being detained for mental health issues, meaning that they're being sectioned, which is 4 times higher than their white counterparts, so 72 white people out of every 100,000. And that was a report from October 2019. So when we consider the impact that that will be having in the workplace, there are things that, yes, we do. Even if I think about MVF actually, which is great. Hannah Meredith is our health and wellbeing advisor. She's brilliant. And Hannah has put in so much mental health advisors, making sure that there is a great health and wellbeing strategy, which is called Be Well. But the thing that I really like that Hannah has done, which is more recent, is really making sure that our mental health advisors look like the people that they are serving. And I think that is really important. If we are introducing mental health initiatives into a business and individuals can't see people who look like them, or ethnic groups can't see people that will understand the different cultural sensitivities, I think we've missed the mark as employers, because what I might need as a Black woman is very different to what somebody who might be from a Bangladeshi background or a Chinese background might need. And I as a Black woman can't understand necessarily the cultural sensitivities of a Chinese woman. So I think we've got to make sure that when we're thinking about our health and wellbeing initiatives, that we are making sure that we cater to cultural sensitivities, so that people, there are people in your mental health first aider groups, let's say, that understand the social pressures that pertain to each of the different ethnic groups within your business, not just to Black people. And I'm not saying that MVF has arrived. We're not. We are on a journey with this, but I think it's really important that we at least cater to that. And I think it's also important to seek out specific support for community by the community. So, for example, there's a really great organisation called Black Minds Matter, and they are all about prevention of mental health rather than cure, and they cater specifically for Black people. So we've got 3 networks at MVF. We've got our LEAP network, which is about, and that stands for Lived Experience of Ethnic People, because we don't like BAME, so we don't use it. We've got our Women's Network, and we've got our LGBTQ network. And for each of those networks, we have been putting together mental health resources which are specific to that group of people, and that I think is important. Make it visible, get talking to the groups of people, in this case Black employees, about what their needs are, and then signpost it regularly so that people know where they can go, because if they're not the type of group or cultural group to talk about it, they'll go and seek it out, but they won't necessarily tell you. So I think we've got to make sure that it's there. And I think the other things that we could probably do is things like challenge our EAPs. A lot of us have got employee assistant programs, but when our employees are calling, how do they support different cultural groups? It was something I was thinking about yesterday, thinking I must ask our EAP this question about, you know, how do they make sure counsellors are well equipped to deal with different ethnic groups and understand different sensitivities. How do we offer training to employees to make sure that line managers understand cultural sensitivities? It's one of the things that I was thinking, how do I do this? How are we going to get this done at MVF and make sure that we can support the 1/5 of our business who are leapers, because that's how many people are in our business that are from different ethnic backgrounds. So I think from that perspective, it's really important. And I think also the other thing that came to mind was about making sure that, particularly with, I'll talk about Black people because that's what I understand, but within mental health, if we want to have Black people represented as mental health first aiders, or if you want to have Black people represented as mentors, we are going to have to go specifically to Black people, groups of Black people, and ask them directly. And that is, and it's not as easy as just putting out a call and saying, oh, will you sign up? Because typically Black people would want to be approached because they won't necessarily see a common call for a mentor or for a mental health first aider and immediately see themselves in that role. the only explanation that I can give, and it's a big topic, is this, that behaviour carries through generations like DNA. And you referred to 400 years of racial inequality and systemic racism. And as part of that 400 years created white supremacy, where white people have privileges and will more often see themselves in certain opportunities or roles. They don't necessarily go through this kind of self-doubt talk in their head of, oh, is that me? Do they mean me? Should I be putting myself forward for that? And I can tell you that there are a lot of Black people who go through this talk in their heads. And that, for me, is a behaviour that has carried through generations like DNA. It might get a little bit deep, but because I am a history buff, but I see those types of behaviours within the Black community. And so I think from that perspective, workplaces and people departments, because I don't use the term HR, but people departments have to know how different cultural groups tend to behave and what they need to do in order to, if you want to get them on board, the types of conversations that you need to have with them and how to approach them as well. I can tell you that I put out a call for mentors so many times in MVF, and not one Black person put themselves forward for it. But then sitting on a call with our leapers about 3 weeks ago, I said to them, guys, I need you to be mentors. Where are you? Because we're going into schools and these children need to see people that look like them. And just by having that immediate conversation, direct conversation, 8 people signed up. Had I done it like that beforehand, I would have got there a lot quicker. And I should have known, because I am a Black person, so I know what goes through in my own head. But I went the long route round and it cost us, and I will never do that again. I won't do it again. So I'm not going to sit on this call and pretend that we get it right. I want to talk about where we've got it wrong, but also where we've realised we've got it wrong and we're going to start doing something differently as well.
I think the visibility stuff is really important. I know from lots of the stuff I've read, especially in the last kind of 12 months, I think I told you about this before, that, you know, in America, you're more likely to see a dentist if you are a Black man, if your dentist is also Black.
Yeah.
And it's exactly as you've mentioned as well, that the seeking of mental health support, again, that happens more frequently when people can see themselves in the person that's offering that treatment. And even if we talk about things like financial well-being, so financial well-being, really hot topic in HR Reward at the moment. Again, you are more likely to seek financial advice if the financial advisor that you've got access to is the same colour as you in Black and ethnic minority groups, but particularly Black people. So having those faces represented across your kind of reward and benefits, and I guess even down to the kind of communications you use, right, and how you're talking about this stuff. I think, you know, I've talked about this on Twitter quite a few times to people, and they've basically said, you know, as long as we're treating everyone like individuals, race shouldn't matter. And I was kind of like, but it does when you have specific groups of people who have different challenges.
Yeah.
So mental health is higher than the national average in Black people. We know it's higher with LGBT plus people. So those people have very specific reasons why. White people don't get racist, but don't have racism. That's affecting their mental health, but Black people do. So actually, exactly as you said, you know, I think it's a really good tip to speak to kind of your occupational health, EAP, you know, any kind of benefit that you have that has all these additional kind of nurse, GP and consultative services added to it, to find out what are they doing about that, and do they have any support specifically for dealing with racism? Because it's, I think you listened to it, but one of the podcast episodes I did with Shaquille Buck from the CRPD, and we talked about racism. We were kind of like, if somebody experienced racism on their way to work on a bus or a train, and they got to work, and that naturally would have really affected their mental health for the day, what do we do with that person? Do we just say, do you want to speak to AAP? Do we just pass them straight off? It's kind of, it's not anything I've ever seen anyone design well-being around, is the specific needs of Black people.
Yeah, it's an interest, even coming back to the point that you made earlier, the stats that you gave around COVID-19, how many employers have actually asked their Black employees how they've been affected by COVID? I personally know 13 people who have passed away from COVID-19. And when you consider those statistics, because of the community that I live in, proportionately, I'm going to have a disproportionate number of people that I know. And I think those kind of things as employers, we're actually missing the mark, even with simple questions like that. Thinking about returning back to work. If COVID-19 is still out there and your BAME employees have to get on public transport, how do you think they're going to be feeling about that, knowing that they are disproportionately impacted by this horrible virus? So what are you putting in your strategy to actually combat that? Are you asking them to come back to work? Because if you are, I think that's pretty awful. So it's thinking a bit further than just kind of a one-size-fits-all strategy to who do we have in our business? What does our business actually look like? What's the demographic? What are the different ethnic groups? And how do we cater to those different ethnic groups? What is going to be on the mind of the people in our business? And it will be different depending on the ethnic group that they are in. So I think we need to just get a little bit wiser.
Yeah, absolutely. So the COVID situation, so we know, as I mentioned before, that it's disproportionately killing Black people. Mm-hmm. The stat I mentioned earlier on, it's disproportionately affecting furlough and redundancy of Black people. Yeah. But the ONS also issued a report a couple of weeks ago that said 1 in 8 people in this country don't have an outside space, so they don't have either a garden or access to a shared garden. Mm. And you are significantly more likely, I think it was 4 times more likely to not have an outdoor space in this country if you belong to the Black community. So again, immediately, even those people who are safe at home are having a very different experience of this virus because of their living conditions, because of their ethnicity.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just a great example of how, you know, we're all in this together is something that's been poured out quite a lot about this virus. But, you know, I think we said it on an earlier podcast with Trish Driver. She kind of said, you know, we're all in the same storm, but we're all in very different boats, and it's affected us all very differently. Absolutely. And acknowledging the different challenges, I think, is really important. I know you and I had lots of areas to discuss, but unsurprisingly, we've had lots of questions. So I'm going to get to some of these questions.
Okay.
Lots of people say hello to you and how inspirational you are. So
thank you. Thanks.
So what are the anonymous question that we've had? Why don't we get organisations to make it mandatory that all employees have to go through unconscious bias training? I think we should have a petition to go to government to make this a legal requirement. What are your views on that?
So you might be surprised by my views on this, but I don't believe unconscious bias training, as people see it, as people recognise it, actually works. I don't believe that bias is necessarily unconscious. I think that there are some things that people do where they absolutely know what they're doing. And and I think that, like, coming back to that statement I made, if you are ignorant and say that you don't know that what you're doing, you've chosen to be ignorant, because there's enough information out there where you could educate yourself to not be ignorant. So at MVF, we actually call it conscious inclusion, because we want to train people to consciously go about treating people and seeing difference and recognizing that difference is a good thing, and having those conversations. And it was a conversation that both myself and Lexi Noonan, who is our head of talent brand, and that's where diversity and inclusion comes under her remit. We were adamant not to call it unconscious bias training, because we don't believe in that concept. I think it's also important that if we're going to be having training of any kind, at the end of the day, we all work, the majority of us work in commercial businesses, and any business has to be able to prove why training is necessary. And difference is commercial. It's, if you have diversity in your business will perform better. There's so many studies out there that prove that. I think it was the McGregor report in 2017 that did a race at work, the government commissioned race at work report. And in that report, they proved that if, and this was just about BAME employees, so if businesses could improve the number of BAME employees that they had in their businesses, that it would boost the economy by £24 billion per year, per annum. And if that isn't a good business case for why we need to do things differently in our businesses, I don't know what it is. Unconscious bias training, I think, if you don't get the right partner to work with, simply teaching people that they have an unconscious bias is an excuse for them to continue to behave as they always have done. But teaching people to recognize difference and lean into having what might be uncomfortable conversations in order to consciously include people is a very different type of training. And that is the training that I would mandate rather than what is typically known as unconscious bias training. I don't like that, and it does not work for any business as far as I'm concerned. So if anybody, and it's not to plug anyone, but I think it's always useful if somebody's doing it right, we should say so. So the Centre of Inclusive Leadership, they were the ones that we worked with on our conscious inclusion training, and the way that they went about it, and that we built the program together, and it's really working for us. But it's the start. It's not the only thing that we should be doing. There's so much more. But thank you for the question. I hope you don't think I'm horrible now that I've poo-pooed unconscious bias training.
Unconscious bias training I've seen has taken a bit of a hammering on social media of late, because I think it can be a bit of an echo chamber, right? If you get somebody who's extremely racist, putting them in that training is not going to direct them, because their racism stems from something that has happened, the way they've been brought up, that kind of stuff. So it's not like, it's kind of, it's really interesting, really interesting. Another anonymous question. Can you please tell us your views on how companies should be communicating with employees on the current Black Lives Matter movement? Should they continue to communicate more broadly as part of their D&I strategy, or bring the focus to racism in the workplace specifically? Oh,
what a good question. Oh, Gethin, where do I start with this? So here's what I think. I think that businesses that have put out huge statements about the fact that they support Black Lives Matter, participated in Blackout Tuesday. We participated in Blackout Tuesday as a business, and I was pleased that we did. But here's what I wouldn't like to see. Businesses that put out big statements, if you're going to put out a big statement, make sure that you're doing the work in your business, rather than just putting it out on a big statement for a marketing purpose or on face value. Because your employees will tell the story of what you're not doing for you if you're not careful. So what else can businesses be doing? I don't know that it is about, for me, it's not necessarily about showing support for Black Lives Matter. Yes, that is important, but for me, what it's really about is understanding the issues around systemic racism and knowing what we need to do in our workplaces in order to dismantle systemic racism. Systemic racism is not broken, so it's not about fixing it. It's a system that was purposely put in place by people in order to have a power construct. So it actually needs to be dismantled. So from my perspective in the workplace, I think we need to be looking at our policies, our processes. This is what institutional racism is. It is basically where you have policies and processes that basically take away opportunities from a marginalized group. And then what makes it structural in terms of racism is the fact that lots of companies are doing it. So if lots of companies decided to review our policies, our practices, our procedures, our processes, and root out things that and ways of working that perpetuate racism, we will all be in a much better place. So I'd love to talk more about that, and maybe we'll get to it a little bit later. So when we talk about, if I can give a few things, a few kind of ideas about what businesses might be able to look at and work on, happy to do that. I just don't know if you're going to ask me a question about it, Gethin. That's why I'm being like, oh.
I don't think we're going to get through them all, unfortunately. For those who are asking, if you'd like a copy of the slides, please email hello@hellobenefx.com and we'll get those sent across to you. Okay, so here's a question here for you from somebody we both know fairly well, Scott Baker.
Hello, Scotty.
Would you be prepared to share any of the initiatives that MVF are taking to ensure equality and fairness remains at the core of HR policy, and also whether the company has introduced or tweaked any since the recent events?
Yeah, so, okay, so I'm going to answer the question because it's a bit of an amalgamation of the last one as well. So here's what we're doing, and by I want to say to everyone that's on the call, we are not perfect. We have not arrived. We are committed to doing this work. And like I said, we started this work probably, I want to say November 2018, because that is when we made our first appointment in terms of the role that Lexi's now in. So the first thing is that we have senior leaders that are taking this seriously, but not just senior leaders. Everybody is taking this seriously. You can tell that I'm very passionate about this. Difference means something to me, and having diversity and inclusion is really important to me as a leader. And quite frankly, I will happily defend this, my position to lead in this space, to anybody who tries to define me. So that's the first thing. Have people who take it seriously, and I think we've got that at MVF. We haven't put out huge company statements. Yes, we participated in Blackout Tuesday, but we haven't put out a huge company statement because I think our first responsibility is to our MVFers. And so we're very fortunate because we have an amazing CEO. He is the best CEO in the land, in the universe, Michael Tex. And Michael is South African. He grew up in apartheid, and he understands what systemic racism can, the impact that it can have on individuals and on a country, on a nation. So Michael has said how he personally feels. I have said how I feel about this. And actually it's less about this is MVF's stance and more about, as a coming from the heart of a leader, this is how we personally feel about this. So we've actually put those messages out in our business, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. We've also got an employee network, our LEAP network, and our LEAP network is amazing. I'm very fortunate to be the sponsor, the exec sponsor for our network, but Zanya Stevenson is, and Nicole and Bex, and I'm going to miss people out, Fran, CJ, I could name them all, but there's a group of our MVFers who are organising great education and initiatives to help to educate, particularly around the Black Lives Matter situation. And at the moment, we're running those events over the next 4 weeks. We're looking at actually having a special guest speaker who I can't say who that is because I haven't secured them yet, but I hope I do. And that person, I want to come in and talk about racism and class, because class plays a huge part in racism and the perpetuation of racism. And I think if we understand that, we'll know better, we can have more ideas about how we can support. We're also working with School 21, which is based in Stratford, and the demographic of School 21, they have quite a number of their students are from the LEAP population. And so our LEAPers, we've run 2 assemblies with them so far because they had lots of questions about what happened with George Floyd. So we've done that and spent some time with their teachers. We're going in again on Thursday, and we're starting a mentoring program with them in the summer. And that is news to any MVFers that are on this call because we haven't announced it internally yet. So sorry guys, we'll let you know about it in the coming weeks. And Zanya, don't kill me for telling everybody that. And the other thing that we are now starting to do, because 12 months ago we started to get data. The only data that we had really from a diversity perspective was gender, because believe it or not, we only had systems at the back end of 2017. So we started to collate data on ethnicity, but also sexual preference and other areas of diversity. So now that we've got that data, we're actually looking at our ethnicity pay gap, and also the pay gap for LGBTQ+ as well. So that work has started in our business with the brilliant Chung, who's going through all of that data, and we've got a meeting tomorrow to take a look at the early view of that. So that's where we are at the moment, but there's so much more that we actually need to do, and we will get to it. So for example, we've got to review our candidate pipeline. We've got to look at where leapers are falling out of our funnel and what we need to do better there. We've got to look at where we're advertising, whether or not there are biases towards candidates, how we help managers to stop hiring in their own image. We've got to take a look at progression rates of leapers, whether our progression is clear enough to people from the LEAP background or even LGBTQ background. And don't forget, all of this intersects. So it's not just about colour, it's about people that are from ethnic backgrounds who might be in the LGBTQ space, or even who might be a woman. So we've got to remember intersection is also really important. And also looking at talent and high potential. Have we got enough people in those groups coming through the pipeline? And I guess the only other thing that I didn't mention that we have already done is we've stopped hiring just graduates. When I arrived at MVF, we only used to hire graduates, and that's ridiculous because everyone knows that if you if you look at the stats, leapers, they are less likely to go to university in this time because it costs about 60 grand to go to uni. And based on the stats that you presented, Gethin, about income in Black households, they're not really going to be able to afford that. So a lot of leapers are choosing the apprenticeship route. So we've introduced apprentices at MVF as well. And all of that will help towards making us a more diverse workforce. But I also want to say it takes time. It's not where you start, it's how you finish. And I think for me, I might not even be at MVF to see the fruit of all of this, because a PwC report has recently said that it takes 12 to 15 years to see significant change when you're trying to move diversity forward. So don't get tired, is what I would say to my colleagues and professionals. Don't get tired, because I've got 3 little nephews, 10, 9 and 4. And my aim and the legacy I want to leave in the workplace is that by the time that they get into the workforce, they're not having to contend with these same issues. That's my aim. So stick to it, guys. 12 to 15 years, it will go by in a flash.
A couple of things you said there, which I think are quite interesting. So I think the recruitment of Black employees reminds me a little bit of kind of STEM. So the issue we've got with girls working in STEM, right, is the fact that those girls never did the higher education, so they don't have the formal qualifications that lots of those roles require. So for that to really change, girls have got to get more involved in those traditional boy subjects at school level, so that in 15, 20 years time they enter the workforce. So I think apprentice stuff is a really good idea, because you're basically circumventing formal education to find people that will still have the job skills to be able to do the work that you want. So I think that's really interesting. You touched upon ethnicity data. We've had a few questions about that. We know that the Reward Employee Benefits Association are now kind of canvassing government and have issued a petition that people can sign to force companies to report on an ethnicity pay gap.
Good.
And I think something we've seen over the last month, as well as like yourselves, companies are now thinking actually we should be reporting on that. And so lots of companies are doing that. There was also a question here about kind of data about, should you be collecting data about ethnicity, and how do you kind of use that data? And I guess it's, we're at the stage where you should be collecting it, right? You need to know that what is happening with your Black employees specifically, if they're going through specific challenges. And it's interesting, we did a YouTube live with Keith Williams, an AI and chatbot expert, last Friday. And we were talking then about how, when you look at how AI is taking over reward benefits and HR, and how disastrous it is with racial bias. And there's a great example from people like Amazon and Facebook, where their systems actively excluded Black people because the data didn't tell them that Black people did well in their company. And that's because they never recruited Black people. So anyone with a, whether it's a foreign sounding name or that kind of stuff, were excluded by the machine because it was using data that was biased, because that data had been created by humans or curated by humans at some point. So it almost feels like people need to get used to the idea that you've kind of got to scrap everything you ever thought about what a good performing employee looks like, because that will probably already exclude Black employees, because like you said, they might not have come through higher education. If you're immediately saying our talent pool comes from this specific type of red brick university, you're naturally not going to get a massively diverse workforce. And I think people just really need to start thinking about actually collecting ethnicity data is a good thing. It doesn't need to be a bad thing. It's being used in the right way, and it's being used responsibly to further the workplace for Black people, then I don't see anything wrong with collecting that data at all.
I agree. I think I actually think, I'm hoping that unlike gender pay gap, and I'd like to also see the government do this with gender pay gap, don't just ask businesses to report the numbers and, you know, give a fluffy account of what we're doing. Hold us accountable year on year to see change. So one of the things that I really want to do at MVF is when we have our ethnicity pay data, our LGBTQ plus data, is I know the government's not asking us to report on it, but we should make it public so that we hold ourselves personally accountable, but also make our objectives as a business, tell people what we're doing so that the public can also hold us accountable. Our MVFers will hold us accountable, I can tell you that much. But I also think it's important to say, these are objectives, this is what we're doing, this is how it's moved on. And where it hasn't moved on, why not? Because we're all in this. I do actually think that as businesses, we can all learn from one another. And if we publish our information, there might be something that your business could help MVF with, and the MVF could help another business with, because we have been bold enough to be transparent. This systemic racism is real, and it's not going to go anywhere unless we get brave. So I think it is really important that, you know, coming back to the issue about collecting data, companies have been collecting, some companies, FTSE 100, if I think about it from that perspective, they've been collecting ethnicity data for years. It's just that they've done nothing with it. So let's just not keep making the same mistake. If we're going to collect people's data, do something, and do something worthwhile.
And that's part of it, right? If we believe, when, you know, I know you and I definitely believe this, systemic racism filters through every part of our lives. We have to change the way we're doing stuff. And you know, on the back of some of the posts I put about Black Lives Matter, you know, the last month or so, somebody told me that they had received about 100 applications for a few roles that they were doing. They were all from white people, and they were like, how do, you know, I can't actively try and recruit black people if I'm only getting CVs from white people. And it's like, so you've got to think about why that might be happening. And exactly as you've said, you can start relationships with schools in predominantly black areas. You can start relationships with black charities. You can actively start to find people. Now, the reality is you will clearly find people who have the empathy, the skills, who are just great people in the black community to come and do the job, in many cases better than white people. So it's kind of like, you just need to change the way you recruit people. And it's interesting, you know, completely kind of unrelated. There was an organization I was speaking to at an event about 2 years ago who told me that they always recruited people from Oxford and Cambridge. So that they were their star performers. That's how they recruited people. That was their ideal candidate. And they'd been doing that for about 5 years until they started looking at recruitment data and compared that with how long somebody stayed with them, what their performance looked like, you know, how high up they stayed with the company, loyalty, all this kind of stuff. And they realized that actually people from those backgrounds didn't perform any different to people that weren't from these traditional red brick universities.
I knew that.
All of a sudden they were like, so we just got it into our head that those people do well, but they looked at the data and it told them that actually it didn't. So they completely threw that out and decided that actually we'll just recruit from any university.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much propaganda out there that is such foolishness. And if we only looked at our data would tell us exactly what we needed to know. So I think we're feeding into, I feel particularly passionate about these things. There are such bright, capable people that are out there. Sorry, my door's gone. Bright, capable people that are out there that may not have the opportunity to go to university. Does that mean that we don't give them an opportunity to do well in the workplace? Quite frankly, we are the ones missing out as workplaces if we don't open our eyes and do something different to the way that we may have been conditioned, and I use that word purposefully, we were conditioned to think previously in the workplace. And let's not forget, systemic racism does actually, it's that does the conditioning, because it will say your business will not thrive if you don't recruit people from red brick universities. Really? MVF is thriving very well. We don't recruit people from all red brick universities. There are definitely, and I'm not knocking red brick universities, by the way, but I just think that, you know, you can have a business that is doing well and you don't have to have everybody being a carbon copy and being the same. Difference does work. It's commercially viable. So do something different.
And it's kind of fascinating. I think, people will realize that if you really want to commit to being a more inclusive workplace, you need to put more effort in, which is going to be more resource and more time and a little bit more money. But as you mentioned, the stat I've got in front of me here, research shows very clearly that when women are more highly represented on corporate boards and the C-suite, conditions improve for other women in the organization. And a similar phenomenon occurs when Black people hold high-ranking positions with companies. And like you've said, a more diverse company, a more diverse board and C-suite leads to higher shareholder returns. And, I guess all of our customers are diverse. The people who are buying, you're a customer of Benefex, right? That's at one point in the past, you're a customer of Benefex. So if you didn't believe that we had all the right tools in place and we weren't the kind of organization that encouraged Black people, and clearly we've got more work to do, like many organizations, then you wouldn't buy from us. So even if you don't believe the fact that we must be supporting Black people, that we shouldn't have a racist society, that it's good for us all to move that forwards, even if you didn't believe any of that, there's a commercial reason to do this.
Absolutely.
So at the very, very least, there's kind of a clear business reason to make more inclusive workplaces. So I think I've got time for kind of one quick question.
Quick.
There's lots for me to choose from. For those asking, the recording will be available. It will be. If you keep an eye on the social channels of Benefex, we will share that. And that's so on Twitter and LinkedIn, that's Hello Benefex. For those who didn't catch it, hello@hellobenefex.co.uk or .com is the email address you need if you would like a copy of the slides. I can't find the question I've got it. So somebody asked, it would be good to understand why BAME is not used at MVF, as well as other labels which can be construed as inappropriate. And she doesn't mean derogatory words. And I've been asked that quite a lot. So it'd be good to get your view on what is the problem with BAME.
Sure. So put very, very simply, just not because it's lack of understanding, just because of time. The term minority is just such foolishness when it comes to ethnic groups, because we're using that terminology in the UK, and I completely agree and understand that in the UK, Black people, Asian people, other people from other ethnic groups may well be smaller in number than white people. But when you apply a world lens to it, there are more people in ethnic groups than there are white people. Why then would we use the terminology minority? It's just ridiculous. And then the second reason why we don't like using it is because the terminology minority for us feels diminishing. We've got, for LEAP, we believe that we can be authentic and limitless and that there are no boundaries for us. And the reason why we've purposefully chosen that as our vision, because systemic racism tells us the opposite. It tells us that as leapers, you should have limitations, you should not be able to flourish. And as far as I am concerned, the term minority actually feeds into the premise of systemic racism, because it diminishes the very people that it tries to make powerless. And so we will not use that terminology at all, not at MVF, and not as long as there is a LEAP network. I don't think it will be used. So yeah. And people of colour is the other terminology. What does that even mean? Because everybody is a person of colour, white people included. So that terminology is it's probably more acceptable to some people, but again, when some of our leapers don't like it, and so we try not to use it too often.
Excellent. So just before we let you all go, lots of questions. I'm really sorry we couldn't get around to them all. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with John Amici, former NBA basketball player, first British player in the NBA. He's been spending a lot of time talking about race and race at work on kind of GMTV this morning, LBC Radio the last couple of weeks. And so we were lucky to get an hour or so with him. So you can find that on our social channels. You can also search HR Futures or search my name and Gethin Nadin. You'll find that wherever you listen to your podcasts. Really good conversation about kind of workplace and a really good kind of accompaniment to what we talked about today. Also at Benefex, we're offering a wellbeing consultancy for free to any employers that want it. So if you want to contact us, you can go to bit.ly/free wellbeing. Those letters need to be capitalized. and we'll be able to kind of put your name in the mix to be able to give you a kind of well-being consultancy session. And a lot of what we'll talk about is how do you create a well-being scheme for really diverse employees and accommodate some of the things that we've been talking about. But that just leaves me to say thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Really appreciate all of your questions and comments. If you'd like to follow the conversation again on Twitter, you can find us at Hello Benefex. You can also use the hashtag BenefexLive. You can find me, Andrea, MVF, to continue that conversation. And thank you so much. I know you don't like doing this stuff, so Andrea, I really appreciate you taking the time out to speak to me about this important issue and get people in reward and benefits thinking about Black Lives Matter too.
No problem. And if anybody does have any other questions, then please find me on LinkedIn. More than happy to engage in conversation directly.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. See ya.